for today's Lunch and Learn, collecting from 7 counties. My name is Pam Schwartz. I'm the Executive Director at the History Center, and I'm going to be kicking this program off. If you are somebody who's familiar with our institution and has been, thank you for coming back, even virtually. And if you're new to our institution, then we're excited to have you today. We do these Lunch and Learn programs on the first Friday of each month, and cover a variety of topics. Every single month, it's a little something new, a little something exciting. And so hopefully you'll be able to join us again in the future. A little bit of background on our institution, if you're not familiar. The History Center is located in downtown Orlando. Our institution covers about 14,000 plus years of history across a 7-county collecting region, which is what you're going to learn about today. We're going to be featuring objects from each of the different counties that we collect from, and we'll give a little bit more background on that soon. We have several floors of permanent exhibitions and also special exhibition halls where we're constantly introducing new topics and new themes, and as well as traveling exhibitions from other museums, such as the Smithsonian, the Burke Museum. Our current exhibition, Mythic Creatures, is actually presented by the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. So if you haven't been down to see that yet, I would definitely recommend it. So our institution is a dual governance system between the county and the society. So while we do receive Orange County government funding, it's only partial. And so we really rely on donations and things to the Historical Society to be able to do all of the great programming and the exhibitions such as this today. Throughout the year. And so we really appreciate that. And I'll drop links into the chat box if you would like to make a donation, if you enjoyed the program today, and hope that you'll continue to join us as well in the future. So today's program is being facilitated as a webinar, just so you know. So you do not have access to audio or to video. So don't worry, we can't see you, though you can see us, and you don't have to worry about muting or anything like that. I would definitely encourage you, though, you may have some questions throughout today. Please feel free to drop those in the chat. I'm going to be keeping an eye on it. And then at the end, after everybody goes through their presentation, as you can see, we've got several speakers today, each of whom will introduce themselves as we're going through the presentation. And we'll have time for those questions at the end. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into today's program. So bear with us here. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. See if I can do this correctly. Okay, can everybody see my screen properly? We got a nod. Okay, I'm going to go with that. Okay, so again, we'll get started. Do feel free to drop your questions in the chat. So just to kick us off, I had mentioned that our museum covers some 14,000 years of history across a 7-county region. So that 7-county region today is and has changed over time. So we cover Orange County and each of the counties that touch it. And so we'll be going through each one of those and sharing an object with you that either comes from or is somehow related to the history of that specific county. In trying to understand county boundaries, it's really complicated, right? These are artificial boundaries that have been created across time. And so 1821 is kind of where I'll start with the modern, so to speak, across 14,000 years, the more modern story of crafting these said boundaries. So in 1821, Florida became a U.S. territory. So I'm not going to walk you through all of this change because that would be a program in and of itself. But you'll see here that over time, the state of Florida has continued to get cut up, diced up, and shifted around for a variety of reasons, whether those be political, geographical, or because of population increase, etc. So in 1821, Florida became a U.S. territory with 2 defined counties, 2 very, very big counties, Escambia to the west and St. John's to the east, which were divided very roughly in the middle by the Suwannee River. By 1824, Mosquito County was established out of St. John's County. And you'll see again, it was still very large. That namesake, of course, is maybe a little less attractive than some of the county names we've come to know, such as Orange, which is quite pleasant in comparison. So county seats were moving, county boundaries were changing, a lot was changing. And again, I'm not going to go through all of those. All of this is just to say that these boundaries have changed and defined over time. And so some objects we might collect may have been from one county, and that's from a place though that is a different county today. So again, I'll just sort of click through these and you'll just see over time, there are more and more changes to all of these different boundaries. In 1845, stepping back a little bit, Florida becomes a state, right around the time Mosquito County starting to get broken down. Each of the counties has a little, has similar history, but also some different history. And so that's what we're going to do today is walk you through some of those different individual stories. Keep adding those boundaries here. So we're going to get started. I'm going to hand it over to Melissa Procco to begin with Orange County.
All right, can we hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. So as Pam mentioned, Mosquito County was formed in 1824. And when Florida became a state in 1845, Mosquito County was renamed Orange County. And those slides that Pam was showing that showed the different sizes of the counties and how they were changing, you'll see that Orange County in 1845 was much larger than it is today, yet the population in 1850 was only a mere 466. So quite a stark difference compared to our now smaller county that has a population of almost 1.5 million residents. Over time, various means of transportation have brought people to and around Central Florida, especially throughout the 19th century. So I'll be talking about that a little bit today. Pam, if you can get to the next slide. All right, so S.G. Dollive reportedly owned the first bicycle in Orlando. It was a Columbia high wheel with a little wheel in the back. Once the safety bicycle was introduced in the 1880s, the bicycle became a really common means of transportation. The safety bicycle, which was named such for being and marketed as safer than the high wheel bicycles, the rider's feet were much closer to the ground. So that made it a lot easier to stop and a lot safer to stop. The rider would be closer to the ground as well, since you weren't on the top of that high wheel, making sure that that one was moving. So the safety bicycles introduced in the 1880s were very similar to this bicycle from 1941 and are very similar to the styles we still see today. As bicycles were becoming more popular, bicycle enthusiasts formed the Orlando Bicycle Club in 1892, and they used the racetrack around Lake Eola for races, and there were various paths around town that they used as well. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So Leslie Pell Clark, who is pictured here standing to the far right with his family, he built a path around the north side of Lake Eola that extended to the Conway area. Pell Clark started spending winters in Orlando in the 1880s, and he brought one of the first two-seater bicycles to the area, but Henrietta, his wife, was not a fan of cycling. He bought the bike anyway, thinking that being in Florida and being in warm weather would make her want to enjoy it. But if you look at some of the clothing that the women are wearing in these photos, you can kind of get an idea of why she might not have wanted to ride a two-seater bicycle with him. So he ended up trading that one in for a standard one-seat bike. But private investments like the paths built by Pell Clark were really necessary during this time because road construction and maintenance wasn't a public service yet. And if you can go to the next one, please. So early transportation investments in Florida looked to private railroads to develop a transportation system for the state. Early roads were really difficult to build and maintain in the sandy and swampy terrain of Florida. So by 1882, there were over 1,000 miles of railroads that had been constructed. These railroads were great for bringing goods and people in and out of cities, but they did very little for transportation around cities and towns and rural areas. Many of these rough dirt roads that you'll see pictured here made riding a bicycle not only very difficult, but pretty dangerous too. So bicycling organizations and enthusiasts began advocating for improved roads, and this became known as the Good Roads Movement. The League of American Wheelmen actually had a publication that you'll see here that was kind of a bulletin about good roads and the different things that are happening across the country with them. And you'll see in this little snippet from 1897 some information about what's happening in Orlando. So as the Good Roads Movement made its way to Orange County in 1896, Orange County commissioners established a special fund for road building and maintenance. They would share half the cost of maintenance with cities and communities throughout the county. But by 1898, Orange County actually began to fully fund the construction of hard surface roads themselves. These would be surfaced typically with clay, but many of these actually had a bicycle path that would be built parallel to the road. As the focus on road improvements started shifting away from bicycles to automobiles, there was still one Orlando resident who was really well known for riding her bike as her main form of transportation well into the 20th century. And if you can go to the next one, please. So this is Alice B. Robinson. She was actually known as the Lady on the Bicycle. She's the daughter of Samuel B. Robinson, who was an early resident and county surveyor. And Mrs. Robinson, or Miss Robinson, was the director of the Miller Robinson Kindergarten, and she was a kindergarten teacher for over 30 years. She was easily recognized around Orlando for riding her bicycle and wearing a wide-brimmed hat, which she is pictured with here. And this bicycle, which was shown earlier, was Alice Robinson's. It is a 1941 Goodyear Double Eagle Clipper. It was designed and manufactured for Goodyear by the Colson Company of Ohio, but only sold under the Goodyear name for 1 year, 1941. So this was the only year it was sold as a Goodyear bicycle. And then after World War II, they were sold by the Colson Company as the Colson Deluxe. Robinson donated her bike to the History Center once she felt that the traffic started to get a little too busy for her to ride, but she still rode this bike for over 30 years and well into her 70s and 80s. And with that, I will pass this off to Jeremy.
Hello. My name is Jeremy Heilman. I'm the One Orlando Registrar here at the History Center, and I am covering Brevard County. So it was named Brevard County in 1855. It was previously known as St. Lucie County, which itself had split from Mosquito County, which became Orange County. In 1860, the population was 246. And as of the 2020 census, the current population is 606,612 residents, and the county seat is in Titusville. The counties of Central Florida obviously have a pretty muddy history, as you've seen already, as far as the boundaries go. So the original version of Brevard County extended much further west and south than the current incarnation. It was named for Theodore Washington Brevard, who was Florida's comptroller at the time. The first established settlement in the area once Florida became a state, so the first American settlement was in Brevard County, was in what is now Cape Canaveral, and that was in 1848. Of course, Cape Canaveral would find a much more significant and famous place in Brevard County history with the development of the space program, with NASA's decision to launch flights from the area. And of course, it is now known as the Space Coast for that reason. Next slide. We're getting there, don't worry. All right, here we go. So the item I have today is from the launch of Apollo 7, which I think is a sometimes overlooked mission in sort of the history of spaceflight, but a very important one. So the actual launch of Apollo 7 was on October 11th, 1968. But the story of Apollo 7 really, in a lot of ways, begins with Apollo 1. After the completion of the Mercury and Gemini programs, the Apollo program began and was really the culmination of NASA's goals to reach the moon. So Apollo 1 did have a crew that unfortunately never flew due to an accident in the testing stages, which killed the 3 astronauts who were participating in that. There were several uncrewed missions prior to the first crewed mission that actually flew, which was Apollo 7. So the three-person crew that flew with Apollo 7 served as the backup crew for Apollo 1. So the three people that you see here in this photo, on the left there, you see Don Isley. On the far right there, you see Walt Cunningham. And in the middle is Wally Schirra, who was one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts and is the only astronaut that flew on Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. So a very sort of prominent figure in that world, and a astronaut's astronaut, I suppose. So Apollo 7 utilized the Saturn 1B rocket rather than the Saturn 5 rocket that the subsequent Apollo missions would use. The rocket itself was less powerful, and the reason for this was because they only really needed to reach lower Earth orbit. The objection was to test their command service module, which was basically the idea that they wanted to make sure that the command module could rendezvous with the lunar module. For the moon landing missions, the command module and the pilot would stay in orbit around the moon while the lunar module would go down to the surface of the moon. So this mission was basically to prove that those two vehicles could link back up, which is clearly a very key portion of this to make sure that they could actually get back. And Apollo 7 was indeed successful in that mission. The mission itself lasted just shy of 11 full days, and it splashed down on October 22nd. And one of the big reasons why Apollo 7 is so significant in spaceflight history is because the space race was very much still on at that time. And at the end of 1968, both the United States and Russia were planning missions to send their astronauts or cosmonauts to orbit the moon. Apollo 8 was set to attempt this in December, but it really could only be done if everything went very well with the objectives of Apollo 7, which was the case, and they were able to do it and were the first mission to orbit the moon, which was very significant, obviously, and led to the later missions and the moon landing missions. There were a couple other firsts with Apollo 7. It was the first TV broadcast from space and the first mission where the astronauts had hot food. Next slide, please. So here you see a photo from the launch. The mission launched from Launch Complex 34 at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. During the period that this was happening, it was called Cape Kennedy Air Force Station. But up until this point, all of the NASA missions, the Mercury and the Gemini missions, had launched from the Air Force Station. This was actually the last one that would launch from there, and everything moved just a little bit north to the Kennedy Space Center launch complex. So it's all basically the same rough area, and what we're most familiar with today is the Kennedy Space Center launch complex. But this was kind of the end of an era for that particular time period. But with Apollo just getting kind of kicked off, it was really the beginning of a new one. Next slide. So this is the item that we have in our collection. This is a pass for the viewing area of Apollo 7. The credentialed viewing area for this launch was on the Merritt Island Causeway, which again is a little bit south of where you would go today for such a launch. There were 700 media credentials issued and 2,000 guest credentials issued. And it was attended by the Florida governor at the time, Claude Kirk, and also Walter Cronkite, of course, who was covering the launch for the news. And just a quick background about the actual item itself here. The badge was issued to E.P. Huey, who at the time was the commander of the Naval Training Center in Orlando. And so it kind of covers, interesting because it covers both, the history here in Orlando and over in Brevard County. It was donated in 2000 by Huey's wife, Jane Huey. And I think it sort of speaks to sort of an interesting part of the collection in that, of course, items directly from the mission are a little bit more difficult to come by. But these ones like this from the, the launch day and from the sort of local connection help tell that story. This object was actually there on launch day, and I think it's kind of important to note that the history extends beyond just, the history of NASA and spaceflight, but there's a really interesting kind of local history and the influence of the space program here locally. You can imagine what it probably would have been like to have been there that day. And I think this is a nice piece that kind of helps us flesh out that story a little bit more about a very interesting time in history. So that is all I have, and I'm going to pass it off to Aaron now in Volusia County.
Hello, so I'm Aaron Paul. I'm the One Orlando Digital Archivist here at the History Center. So Volusia County was created from a portion of Orange County on December 29th, 1854, with a population around 600 people. Its current population is a little bit over 500,000 people. And between the 2010 and 2020 census, the population increased 12%. Next slide. So Volusia County is home to the Ponce de Leon Inlet Lighthouse, which is the tallest lighthouse in the state and the third tallest in the country, sitting at 175 feet. In 1835, the first lighthouse was erected in what was then called Mosquito Inlet, but ran into problems immediately. To begin, the oil for the lamp never got delivered, and soon after its completion, there was a large storm that washed out much of the sand around the lighthouse, making it unstable. To add to that, 1835 also marks the beginning of the Second Seminole War, which included an attack by Seminole forces against the lighthouse in December of 1835. And that attack led to the lantern room, glass getting smashed, the wooden stairs being set on fire, and the area getting abandoned. And to add to that, the very next year, the lighthouse collapsed and didn't get rebuilt until 1887. And this photo was taken in 1921 of the lighthouse. Next slide. So the lighthouse remained in use until 1970, when a new one was established at New Smyrna Beach. And at that point, the lighthouse was turned over to the town of Ponce Inlet, which turned it into a museum that is still open today. And this is an aerial photo of the site, looking very different than it does now, and it was taken in 1981. Next slide. So this is what the lighthouse looks like as of last month. A lot more developed, a lot more streets, a lot more parking lots. Next slide. So right next to the lighthouse is the Marine Science Center, which is where our physical donation came from, and one of our most recent donations from Volusia County. So the Marine Science Center serves as a museum and is open to the general public. It's also a rehab facility for injured birds and sea turtles, and all turtles. And so the first item that we have from them is a handmade mask that was made by a volunteer with the Bird Hospital for other employees or other volunteers during the pandemic. This was kind of the early days of the pandemic. And so the mask directly represents, COVID-19's effect on Central Florida, on Volusia County, and kind of how the community responded to that event and how they, did things to help out people around them and keep everyone safe. So the pandemic has also been kind of one of our big collecting areas since the pandemic started, because of how large of an effect it has on our entire community and the entire world. So in addition to that, the mask comes from Volusia County, which we don't have a ton of objects from, and it has a story that we know about, which adds kind of the value and usefulness of the mask. Next slide. So the second object, it kind of goes along with the mask. It came from the Marine Science Center as well, a little bit later, but both items were collected in 2021, last year. And this was originally donated to the Science Center in 2019 or 2020 after the Daytona Beach half marathon ended. And it came with a ton of other towels that also didn't end up getting used. Not enough finishers, not enough people, extra towels available. So instead of throwing them away, they donated them to the Marine Science Center. The Marine Science Center used them to line cages for birds, helped wrap birds in them so that they can be treated, they can be given fluids, they can get weights taken on them, help with cleanup. They're used all over the place for so many different things. So for our interest, it both represents the marathon itself, and it also shows kind of how it was used following that at the Marine Science Center, and kind of how it got recycled and reused, and ultimately ending up in our collection. And that next slide, I'll pass it off to Travis.
Thank you, Aaron. Today, I'll be presenting on my native county, Polk County. As you can see, it serves as a buffer between Tampa and Orlando along the very busy and important Interstate 4 corridor. It's the 4th largest county in total land in the state of Florida, and is named after James K. Polk, who was the 11th president of the United States. Historically, Polk County's primary resources or primary industries have been driven by agriculture, phosphate mining, and tourism. The abundance of natural resources and tourist attractions such as Bach Tower, Cypress Gardens, and now Legoland have long welcomed visitors to Polk County. It may surprise you to know that there was an inn and restaurant just outside of Lake Wales, which counted itself as one of Polk County's most unique destinations, earning an international reputation and an elite clientele. Next slide. This is the Chalet Suzanne restaurant and inn, as you can see. Hard to imagine that you could find this in Polk County, but it was a very popular place. It opened in 1931. It was designed as a Technicolor Swiss village with clock towers, peaked roofs, and small balconies. I'm going to read you an excerpt of a New York Times review from 1973. At the Chalet Suzanne, the new arrival feels he has stumbled into a fairy tale land, not a slick one fashioned by the Disney people, but a place inspired by a quaint, dog-eared, half-forgotten children's book. And such funkiness is refreshing because here in Florida, most tourist attractions spring forth sparklingly new and terrifyingly well-engineered. Yesterday's barren swamp is today's Disney World, but the Chalet Suzanne has had no such instant genesis. It is the end product of 40 years of one family's success and sorrow, tragedy and triumph. Proprietor Bertha Henshaw, this is how it got started. She converted their mansion into a restaurant and inn after her husband, Carl, he lost his fortune in the stock market, and within days of realizing his financial ruin, he passed away. In need of income, this was the Great Depression times. This forced Bertha into converting the mansion into a 30-room inn and restaurant. An architect who once visited the chalet exclaimed, "It's a monstrosity, but it's delightful." Bertha Henshaw broke every rule in the book and got away with it. And food critic Duncan Hines, yes, that Duncan Hines, saw a sign for the chalet and stopped in to check it out. His stories helped put the chalet on the map for a national audience. Now, it was located just 4 miles outside of Lake Wales, and prior to the area's development, it was once very secluded, and it was surrounded just by orange groves and cattle ranches. And the property itself was accessible either by a winding driveway or a 2,400-foot grass airstrip. It was known for its opulent 6-course dinners and very intimate decor. It was a special occasion destination for locals as well as tourists. It was consistently voted one of Florida's best restaurants and the winner of numerous Florida Trend Golden Spoon Awards. It became famous for its food, but its unique charm is what set it apart from other great restaurants throughout the state. Next slide. So in the 1950s, as the chalet began to develop its reputation, not just for dining, but as a vacation spot, it also became known for its eclectic variety of soups. Bertha, her daughter-in-law Vida, she said that the inn soup business began in Bertha's very own kitchen with just a single hand-operated machine. Bertha's son, Carl, who was a World War II pilot, and he helped develop the inn's grass airstrip, really took a hand in developing the chalet's burgeoning soup factory. In 1956, he brought a pressure canner and began the limited processing and marketing of the inn's signature soups, which eventually produced 19 varieties, including their world-famous soup romaine. Now, romaine was something that Bertha had concocted out of chicken broth, chopped spinach, mushrooms, carrots, chopped onions, and her own mysterious bouquet of herbs that she gathered after a visit to Europe, in which she became particularly enthralled with Rome. The FDA, they actually objected to the naming of the soup because it doesn't have romaine lettuce in it. But Bertha got a researcher at the University of Florida to come up with an etymological brief contending that romaine actually means served in the Roman fashion. Oh, and chalet soups were served in ceramic Norwegian ashtrays. So that just further adds to the unique dining experience. And within 30 years, into the 1980s, the chalet was processing 18,000 cans of soup per day in what they called a marvel of stainless steel efficiency. Chalet soups were supplied to gourmet shops all over the nation and eventually could be found on your local shelves at Publix as well. Next slide. So the chalet had a really loyal customer base, which included among its ranks movie stars, TV personalities, and even astronauts. And the following was so widespread that was one of the reasons they maintained the airstrip or the airfield on the property, is for people who would just fly in for dinner and for quick stays. This had special appeal to astronauts over on the coast because it was just a short hop from Cape Canaveral. One astronaut in particular from the Apollo program, James Irwin, was such a fan that he helped convince NASA to allow the chalet soups to serve as his crew's nourishment in space. The term souped up spacecraft took on new meaning in 1971 during the Apollo 15 mission to the moon, which featured Irwin, as well as David Scott and Alfred Worden, when they took with them freeze-dried gourmet soups from the chalet. In 1975, the chalet's seafood mushroom soup was served on the first ever international space dinner date between American astronauts and Russian cosmonauts on the Apollo-Soyuz mission. As you can see here, this can of moon soup, which is now in the museum's collection, it represents one of Polk County's most unique contributions to space travel, and fittingly from one of the county's most unique destinations. The chalet was named to the National Register of Historic Places in 1990, but sadly, changing tastes and expenses put the chalet out of business in 2014. But today, it serves as the home of Refuge on the Ridge, which is a drug and rehabilitation center. So with that, I will send it off to Jordan.
Hello, my name is Jordan. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. So I'm taking over and presenting about Osceola County. Osceola County was formed from Brevard and Orange County on May 12th, 1887. originally spanning all the way down to Lake Okeechobee, as you can see here. It was then sectioned of itself in 1917. Osceola County got its name from a Billy Powell, who at 16 changed his name to Osceola and became a prominent figure and symbol for the Seminole people against U.S. oppression. Next slide. Today I want to highlight the Hertzberg Saddle Shop. The saddle shop opened in 1917 by Fred Hertzberg with just a small $100 loan. Shows you times have changed and what you could do with a little skill and money. The store originally opened as a shoe repair shop, but quickly branched out into everything to do with leather and had multiple locations in Kissimmee and St. Cloud. The most recent store was actually located on 12 East Darlington Avenue in Kissimmee, and the building still stands. More modern iterations of the store sold everything but focused primarily on baseball gloves. The pair of boots you see here are in the collection, the History Center's collection, and was donated by an Orange County Sheriff collection drive, demonstrating the popularity and success of that little store. Of course, the namesake of the store helped the core of their identity. Hertzberg used the saddles to start one of the longest lasting relationships that the store had and helped form the community in Osceola County. Their relationship with the Spur Rodeo lasted almost 50 years until the saddle rack closed. Starting in 1951, each year the shop would donate a handcrafted saddle to the Spur Rodeo all-around cowboy, a tradition that continued until 1970, where a new owner decided it was better to donate a pre-made saddle from Texas to the rodeo. The owner was quoted that the cost to hand make the saddles didn't quite make sense anymore, but still wanted to keep the tradition alive. Next slide, please. In 1967, Enoch Hertzberg, Fred's son, sold the shop to a previous employee, Earl Evans, and the saddle rack was born. The saddle rack was a featured attraction for those who wanted to come to the area but not want to go to Disney. One of the heartwarming story of it is that the previous employee used to sweep the floors at the Hertzberg saddle shop and learned his leatherworking trade underneath the previous owners. The relationship between Saddle Rack and the Silver Spur Rodeo really touched the community of Osceola County because the Silver Spur Rodeo had its origins from local families and started in 1941. Next slide. Sorry, next slide. Yeah, thank you. The Silver Spur Rodeo might be the reason Hertzberg Saddle Shop continues to live in the hearts of the people in Osceola County. It was, like I said, or mentioned, it was started in 1941, and that first rodeo was actually, you gained admittance from a war bond. That was right before the World War II, and it's still in operation today. They're actually going to have their 148th rodeo this February, so that's awesome. It's just some fun facts about Osceola County and the area. They actually had the oldest lasting hardware store in Florida in the Mickelson Hardware, just down the road. that was around for almost 137 years. It actually just recently closed in 2021 because of the pandemic. And I'll hand it off to Whitney from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Whitney Barrett. I'm the archivist here at the History Center, and I'll be talking about Lake County. So Lake County was established May 27th, 1887, from an act from the Florida legislature, and it was created from portions of Sumter and Orange County, and it was named because of the number of lakes that it had within its borders. And at the time it was formed, it had a population of 8,034 people. And according to the 2020 census, its population is now 383,956 people. So Tavares is the county seat, although there is some controversy behind that decision. An election was held for the county seat in October of 1887, but there ended up being 3 elections due to the amount of fraud, bribery, and buying of votes that took place. And so the final election took place on July 17th the following year. And in the end, 1,162 votes were cast for Tavares and 927 were cast for Leesburg. Next slide, please. So since citrus is was such a big industry in Lake County, the items that I've chosen from our collection are some citrus labels. On the screen, you'll see 2 citrus labels from the Golden Gem Growers Incorporated, and this was a cooperative citrus packing house that was located in Umatilla. Next slide, please. And here are 2 other brands that use the Golden Gem Growers facilities. And you'll notice that they both have the Golden Gem Growers Inc. located on the labels. And you notice I outlined those in green there on the labels on the screen there. So in 1947, 3 men organized the Grand Island Citrus Company, and it was officially incorporated on January 24th, 1951, under the name Grand Island Citrus Cooperative. However, the name was changed to the Golden Gem Growers in 1961. And this cooperative was formed due to the hardships that citrus farmers were facing at the time. Their fruit was returning less than production costs, markets were hard to find, and the specialty citrus products that can be found today were not yet popular, but their crops were growing larger and larger. And so this led to a small group of farmers to work together to purchase their own facilities and eventually be able to handle their fruit products from the grove all the way to the grocery store. They hired employees that grew the crop, they harvested it, processed it, packed it, and were also involved in the marketing and management of the company. Next slide, please. So something interesting about this specific co-op is that based on the Sentinel article from 1951, it was the first organization in Florida citrus to settle with growers based on the quality of their fruit that was delivered for canning, not just the quantity. And so this incentivized growers to improve the quality of their fruit for harvest so they could get more money for their product. Lake County's citrus industry, unfortunately, was hit by bad freezes in 1983 and 1985. The combined effects of the freezes resulted in the annihilation of groves, killing both mature and young trees and causing a profound economic impact and prompting many growers to replant farther south. When another bad freeze hit in 1989, Lake County growers still had not fully recovered from the previous 2 freezes. And between 1985 and 1996, Lake County citrus groves lands went from over 120,000 acres to just 20,000. But the co-op stayed in business by buying fruit from growers in South Florida to pack locally. By the early 1990s, 90% of the fruit that they were packing came from outside of Lake County. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, even though they were still able to pack fruit from outside their county, the Golden Gem growers had to file for bankruptcy in September of 2001. It went up for sale or lease to the highest bidder in December of 2001, and Citrus World won the bid to take over the lease. And at that time, it was the largest citrus cooperative in Florida. And Citrus World is the company that produces the Florida Naturals brand that we can see on the shelves today. Although it greatly impacted the number of employees that were needed to run the company, the takeover still allowed for the plant to remain open in Lake County. So it wasn't all bad. Next slide, please. And lastly, here are some pages of the Golden Gem News. This is a newsletter that was produced by the Golden Gem growers that kept members up to date about the company and the citrus news in general. And we have a few copies of these in our collection as well. So that's a little bit about citrus in Lake County. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Bradfield. I am the oral historian for the Orange County Regional History Center. Well, I guess that makes sense because you're watching Orange County Regional History Center's Lunch and Learn. So today I am going to talk about Seminole County, the one county in our region that was founded in the 20th century. Its first and current county seat is Sanford. It is one of the smallest counties in Florida, ranking 64th out of 67. And its current population is 470,000 as of the 2020 census. And as you can see from 1970, it's almost quintupled in size. I had to double check that math before I started this because as historians, not necessarily known for our ability to do math. So next slide, please. Okay, so Seminole County is, I think mostly known by these 7 cities as the cities that constitute it. I think that Sanford and Altamont Springs are discussed most frequently when talking about it, but today I'm going to talk about Oviedo, and I'm going to talk about Oviedo and the Dinky Line. So if you could skip to the next slide, please. Okay, so the Dinky Line, or the Orlando and Winter Park Railway, was called the Dinky Line due to the noise that the caboose would make. It extended from, as you can see, the Orlando Arcade through downtown Orlando all the way to Oviedo. It was originally started in the late 1880s and was expanded to Oviedo in 1891. So what I'm going to talk about is the state of Oviedo when the Dinky Line originally was laid there. And next slide, because we have a really fantastic picture of what was Howard Street in Oviedo. So this is from the biography of Oviedo, biography of a city. This are some direct quotes. In 1885, just to start off, the population in Oviedo was 263. So an incredibly small town that had some citrus, and then in the 1930s switched to celery, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that in a minute. So quote from this book, the 2 railroads gave color and excitement to the town. Upon leaving Sanford, the branch track passed a neighborhood of rustic beauty. The line plunged into raw woods of pine and scrub oak, fire-bitten swales giving way to deep cypress swamps, through which the right-of-way was cut like a dark evergreen tunnel, each side of which was a solid wall of impenetrable moss and foliage. So at the time, it was, essentially, untapped wilderness around Oviedo, and then the small little farming community in the middle of it. In discussions of it from the same page, from the west came the Osceola and Lake Jessup Railroad, which was dubbed the Coffee Pot Line or the Dinky Line. Residents of Lake Charm, which is a little further west on that map, did not need a streetcar. They could ride. Residents of Lake Charm did not need a streetcar. They could ride between Lake Charm and Oviedo on the Dinky, as J.H. Lee's children frequently did. Here you could leave Oviedo at 7:50 a.m., travel through Winter Park to Orlando, spend the day, and then return to Oviedo in the evening. So it opened up Oviedo, which, as previously discussed, was a really far disparate small agricultural community, to just being able to actually see the rest of this area and connected it at the time, which, as you've noticed by the dates, probably, since it didn't split off until 1913, was all one county. It was all under Orange at the time that it opened in 1891. And moving on, Oviedo was almost as far from state and national life as it had ever been. Each of the railroads, in fact, was running only one train in and out of Oviedo every day in 1896. So even with that this connection, it still stayed a disparate farming community up through the 1930s, and has most recently seen its extensive growth. But the railroad did open it up to sell its celery and orange outside of the small area, and it did open it up to transportation and travel from Orlando. There's an article from the Polk County News talking about Oviedo Day in Orlando, where there was free transportation from the citizens of Oviedo to come visit Orlando and basically spend the night. They were hosted by Orlando well-to-dos. They were greeted by the Orlando Cornet Band. They escorted to the Opera House for an elaborate dinner, but also to show you the sign of the times. They were delayed because the train hit a cow that crossed over the tracks. So it's still pretty pioneer Florida at this time. So you might be wondering, why am I talking about trains? We're all talking about artifacts. So if you could go to the next slide, we have a railroad spike from the Dinky Line. We don't unfortunately have very much about this donor. I pulled them up. It is Aldridge Minter. And we don't, I looked it up. I couldn't find anything more, but he donated this railroad spike. It was removed from the last connector of rail. The railroad eventually saw a decrease in use due to the Great Depression, then the growth of cars. Eventually, it was only doing one trip per day across the entire line, really slowing down by the 1960s, and then finally closed in 1969 when the last bit of track was removed. But even with that, that piece of history ending relatively sadly, unfortunately, you can't take the train from Orlando to Oviedo anymore. It still opened up transportation across what was a very disparate, pioneer, and brush-heavy part of our community that's now a really vibrant part of it. So yeah, that's about all I had. So passing it back to Pam.
Great, thank you so much. So we do have a few minutes for questions. If anybody has them, please go ahead and drop those in the chat. One that I know we had come in to start was from our first presenter, Melissa. The question was asked, does the Orlando Bicycle Club still exist?
The Bicycle Club that was formed in 1892 does not still exist, but there are a number of other clubs throughout Orlando and Orange County that are bicycle clubs specifically that still exist today.
Here's one, I think, for Dan. Does the Dinky Dock is the Dinky Dock in Winter Park part of the railroad line?
Yes, it was, and it was laid through the Rollins College campus. I'm getting that part of the history right, Melissa?
Yes, it was.
Yes. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And to follow on that, we had the question, why, if it was already mentioned, we apologize, but could you repeat why it was named the Dinky Line?
So from what I saw, it was named the Dinky. Oh, well, I guess with the Dinky Dock, that makes it confusing. I was going to say it was it originally had a nickname due to the noise, the enormous noise that the engine made off of it. That was what I at least read earlier.
And
So
I'll jump in. Sorry, Dan.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Too, because it was notoriously unreliable. It was always late. It was jumping tracks constantly. As Dan mentioned, there was one time where it hit a cow. And so it was just known for being a really unreliable source of transportation. So that also lent itself to the nickname Dinky Line.
Questions? If you have other questions, feel free to drop those in the box. I'll just make another quick announcement you can see here on the screen. We hope that you've enjoyed our Lunch and Learn today. These are just a few items, one from each county of the thousands of really incredible artifacts and images, archives, and stories that we have in our collection. How do we get these collections? from the community. People bring them to us and they donate them. So always keep us in mind if you're, cleaning out closets or have something that's maybe, been in the family a while and you'd like to find a home where it can also tell a story for the entire community. Always feel free to reach out to us. We're always willing to look at different donations and always looking for things from Orange County, but also all of those counties that touch it to help us tell a broader narrative. There's the big stories, and then there's some of these really cool, intricate little stories that you might not otherwise hear from. Our staff, Whitney, put in that we need more things from Lake County. Yes. If I had to say, it would be a guess, but we've a lot from Orange County because we're situated here. Any of these other counties, we could certainly collect more items from. And that's everything from sort of memorabilia from different businesses or restaurants that used to be, photographs of your grandparents' time there, and different things like that. So we're always looking for those stories. If you love this Lunch and Learn, we have another one coming up next month that's actually going to be about Central Florida's auto racing legacy. That'll be Friday the 4th at noon, again, virtual. We're kind of basing our program, seeing what's happening here with the pandemic. But coming up before that, we do have an on-site program where people will be able to sort of spread out. But that is on January 22nd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. We'll be hosting our annual Orange County Heritage Day. So this event is free and open to the public. We'll be celebrating one of the things that makes Florida's truly unique environment. That's the American alligator. There is going to be an alligator on site, so that's very exciting. We're going to have a lot of friendly family activities and different things going on. And we'll also be doing a free screening of, I think it's Raya, maybe Raya, Raya and the Last Dragon, which I actually watched over the holidays and is a super cute movie, including complimentary popcorn and shaved ice treats. So if good movies get any better, it's definitely with snacks. And then we have postponed, you may have seen already that we had a brunch series that's got really kind of fun interactive programs called our Mythical Mornings that are in tandem with our Mythical Creatures exhibition. We have postponed those from January out to February and March, but that gives you more opportunity to get signed up. It'll feature the fun presentations, also drinks from our friends at Carib Brewing USA, and an exclusive exhibition tour. So feel free to go to our website if you'd like to get in on any of these great upcoming programs. Join us next month for Central Florida's auto racing, and check out our website. We have a lot going on. You can sign up for our e-newsletter or also become a member, which is really a great value and is sort of a gift that keeps on giving throughout the year. So thank you again for joining us. We do have those links at the beginning of the chat. If you love the program today and you'd like to donate even a few dollars to helping us continue all this great programming, we would really appreciate that. You have a lovely rest of your day. A big thank you to our collections team for putting this great and very interesting presentation together. And we hope you have a lovely weekend and that we'll see you again soon.